Doug Ford's on Team Canada. He's maybe our first line center. He's been an incredible patriot.
Will Carney release his budget? Welcome back to Moose and Loose. My name's David. Today we're looking at the aftermath of this whole Doug Ford situation, and we've got Steve McKinnon on CBC talking to Rosemary Barton about potentially an election. The Liberals wouldn't mention this if it wasn't serious, so there is some teeth to this because they want to get Canadians used to this idea. They don't want to spring this on Canadians out of nowhere. At least that's what it seems like here. And towards the end of the video, we have some pretty shocking BC provincial polling data. Let's jump into this. Starting this one off, we've got Pierre Poilievre posting an event here. No More Sacrifices youth event for Pierre Poilievre. This is a smart move, double down, as the Liberals are trying to scoop up the youth's vote, which is a desperate thing in general, considering the Liberals have destroyed the future of all youth in Canada. But this one's out in Toronto Eaton Centre, 6 p.m., October 30th. So Mark Carney over in Asia right now. We got a little recap here.
The government of Canada stands ready to build on the progress that we had been making in our negotiations or discussions with our American counterparts.
This is a kind of propaganda against U.S. citizens. You know, it's psyops. Why would the government of Ontario? I'm told that they have spent or were planning to spend up to $75 million on these ads to come across the U.S. border. So what was the purpose of that other than to sway public opinion?
Of course, that is some reaction to the decision by the U.S. president to terminate trade talks with Canada following that ad by Ontario, anti-tariff ad. The ad did run again over the weekend during the World Series, and it featured clips by the former Republican president, Ronald Reagan, expressing his stance on free trade. So was all of this
clips that were all out of order? Well, let's just call it as it is. It was a misrepresentation of Ronald Reagan.
Effective? Was it a disaster? Can trade talks get back on track?
We're going to just listen to what Benzie has to say here from the Toronto Star. This is what you'd expect from the woke left.
Ford believed that this worked. Does he think it backfired? Do we have a sense of where the Ontario government is now that the ad is going to be pulled and the trade talks have collapsed?
Well, I mean, the ad was effective, Rosie. I mean, I wrote the first story on this ad when it was shown to a private audience on October 8th. It hadn't been released yet, and I thought it was an effective ad, but the government of Ontario wouldn't give me a copy of it so I could look at it again to write my story. So I had to go back and watch the entire 5 minutes Ronald Reagan speech from April 1987, and it is accurate. The ad's accurate. The ad quotes Mr. Reagan accurately, and it's a good reminder to a lot of people that Ronald Reagan was a free trader. He's also the guy who gave.
They reordered the clips though, and they cut out all the relevant information showing that he was in favor of free trade, but he also used tariffs, including tariffs on Japanese vehicles at 100% back in the day. Like, let's call it what it is. Why can't we just have honest conversation about what happened? It wasn't a good idea. Doug Ford was out of line. Prime Minister of Canada should be negotiating with the President of America. We shouldn't have these Looney Tunes. Now we've got David Eby's going to be doing the same thing, running ads, foreign interference. These guys all need to be thrown out of power.
Trump stole the slogan, "Make America Great Again," from Mr. Reagan. That was President Reagan's 1980 campaign slogan, "Let's make America great again." Mr. Reagan.
As a smart move. I mean, Ronald Reagan is the essentially godfather of the modern conservative movement. That's why he took the slogan. Now, on the flip side, let's listen to what Scott Reid has to say on the same thing.
A little bit of whiplash over the end of the week there. What is your initial impression of how this thing went down?
You know what? I like it. And I think Canadians like it. I like a little flash of strength. I like a little flash of steel. And, you know, at Doug Ford's whole ambition was to capture the attention of the President of the United States, of the citizens of the United States, well, then I think he rolled a Yahtzee, because he's certainly got that attention. And, you know, the president himself, of course, by screaming and squealing like a child without his toy, made certain that everybody in the States saw this ad, shared this ad. So
that's true. But I mean, this stuff has to end. We have to stop having our media insulting the President of America when we're trying to get a deal. Like, how stupid are these people? They're not helping the situation here. This crap is broadcast across the country on TVs all over Canada. And this is what they see. You have to imagine there's somebody in the White House watching this stuff and showing Trump, hey, look what they said about you here. It doesn't help the situation. Maybe just stay neutral for once. Our media is so despicable. It's quite something.
I think we end up showing a little bit of strength, flexing a little bit of muscle. Trade talks with Trump, they're up, they're down, they're off, they're on. It's impossible to follow. We'll get back to where we need to. And if there's a deal, then there will be a deal. But I'm I think
this is such a pathetic approach here. We can easily get a deal if Carney actually negotiated. They're trying to set the stage here of what to expect now. They're like, well, Carney tried his best, but he can't negotiate with a guy who's just crazy, a guy who's just unreasonable to negotiate with. Yeah, Donald Trump plays hardball, and he's in the most powerful position in the world, heading America. But we can still get a deal because we have the best leverage of any country in the world. Carney is not giving up something. These guys keep smearing Trump, which is the dumbest thing. The guy is very vengeful. Why are they contributing to the problem? Real people have lost their jobs. People are in real bad situations, and these idiots keep running this stuff. Sure, it's cushy for them with their high-paid salaries, a lot of them propped up by taxpayers. The average everyday Canadian is not laughing about more tariffs, 10% more. I mean, the forestry industry is on the brink of collapse.
With me now to discuss the potential impacts on the lumber industry is Brian Menzies, Executive Director at Independent Wood Processors Association of British Columbia. Thank you for joining me, Brian. So Trump has hit Canada with yet another tariff. What is your message to the president following this?
We're at a place now where we're at a tipping point, and nothing is going to be said across the border any longer. I think the difficulty is the decisions on whether to keep operating is going to be made much quicker now, and people will have to, in Canada, will have to consider whether or not they'll keep people employed or not. These are very, very difficult times. But another story about this is we had an American customer come up here who buys our cedar wood products, and his company is based on that, and was devastated. He says that his company in the United States is going to shut down now. So, this is, like I say, we're at a tipping point.
These tariffs are interesting because they really make no sense on the lumber. I understand Trump doing it on autos because then you can force these companies to move their business to America to make cars, but you can't force the trees to move there. Like, it doesn't make any sense. The trees have to be cut in Canada. So his tariffs make really no sense whatsoever. As you heard a firsthand example there, American businesses shutting down. I think he's just using it as extra leverage, but it's pretty greedy move because it's destroying businesses both in Canada and America just to use it as extra leverage. Unfortunately, that's just the reality of a guy like Donald Trump. He's worth whatever billions of dollars. He's detached from what real life is like for average everyday Canadians, or Americans in this case, how hard life really is. When you add these huge tariffs on American business, then you get slammed. There's nothing else you can do. There's no other lumber that's easily accessible to them. And same thing with Mark Carney here. This guy, globalist, elitist banker, Mr. Moneybags, he's the same thing, detached from reality. I mean, when someone has this many stocks, there's no way he understands what the everyday person is going through. Not to mention when he's getting like 81% return on his stocks here since he became prime minister. It's just really quite something that the media keeps painting Pierre Poilievre like Donald Trump, when really Donald Trump and Mark Carney have a lot more in common than Pierre Poilievre does with Trump. I mean, just looking at their net worth alone, they're not even close. Carney and Trump are much closer, and that sculpts their entire lifestyles despite them being on the left and the right.
Talk, specifically about your industry. How detrimental is this 10% going to be for you?
Well, 45% was detrimental. 55% is just a wall. I don't know how we can continue operating at this point. We are going to have to look for other markets. It takes a long time to do that. And we will need more financial supports to keep us alive if that's what we want to do. I think it's very important that we remind ourselves that in Canada, softwood lumber is part of the whole package of trade with the United States. Should be involved with overall discussions with the United States, but this is really devastating.
Okay, and
is it just sad because the forestry industry is basically the sacrificial lamb in this whole thing? And we've got the media running their mouths like idiots, which doesn't help the situation. It's one thing to not like Trump and what he's doing, but it's another thing to make things worse for Canadians in the process. And that's what these liberal pundits, news anchors, CBC and CTV are doing.
I'm going to start on the news, if that's okay. And that is the news that the president has terminated trade talks after seeing this ad that the Ontario government paid for. What do you make of this decision by the president?
Well, what the Prime Minister has been very strong on with all of us since this entire process got underway is control what you can control. Mm-hmm. This is obviously not something that we can control from any point of view. So keep your head down, keep working. If you're involved in the trade discussions, stay working on the trade discussions. If you're productively occupied elsewhere on the government's agenda, keep marching forward. We have have a plan, we have work to do, and keep doing the work. And the problems, obviously, the Prime Minister carries a hard and a large burden in terms of those. But all of us, I think, are all pretty resolute to just keep marching down the field.
Yeah, that's a whole lot of nothing. Just a bunch of slogans. All they want to do is roll out Mark Carney's net zero agenda.
Has there been, to your knowledge, a conversation with the Premier to stop running the ads?
I have no idea. Here's what I will say, though. Doug Ford's on Team Canada. He's maybe our first-line center. He's been an incredible patriot. He sweats blood for his province. Obviously, we see that every day. So I'm loath to criticize Doug. There's a name for you, Rosie. Doug Ford for anything.
Do you
listen to this blubbering coming from the Liberals of Doug Ford? Liberal buddy Doug Ford. I think it's time for old Dougie to change the color of his party.
I imagine there's an effort to get the trade talks going again.
Well, what I can say is that these talks have advanced significantly. I think the Prime Minister has been updating Canadians on that. We are far down the road on discussions in the sectoral tariffs. It'll be for others to describe, that progress in greater detail.
So this isn't a setback,
but a lot of work by a lot of serious people in the United States and in Canada has happened. I don't want to diminish anything, but I do want to say that a lot of work's been done, and it's hard to imagine that work would go for naught.
Okay, I'll move on to the things you're more directly concerned with and involved in, and that is, first and foremost, getting the budget passed. So that's happening in a couple of weeks, the budget delivery anyway, not the vote. You said this past week that you're worried. What are you worried about?
Well, about math. We have a minority government, but we do believe we have a mandate to present a plan, the Prime Minister's vision of moving this country forward economically. That's what we'll be doing on November 4th. The opposition parties, if you take them at their word, what they say publicly, Mr. Poilievre, who's put forth a set of demands that he already knows are unattainable, and by the way, wants the deficit looked after, but wants to subtract tens, hundreds of billions of dollars of revenues from the federal government. So that's pretty hard to square. Mr. Blanchette of the Bloc Québécois, who called the budget illegitimate, coming from someone with 22 seats in a 343-seat House of Commons. That's a little rich, but called it illegitimate and said he wouldn't vote for it in both cases without having read any part of it. The Prime Minister has met with both of those leaders and the other leaders in the House of Commons. We've listened to what they've had to offer. That's good because it requires them to take stands. It'll be up to them to explain and defend those stands. But as we speak right now, we don't have the votes.
Right, but isn't that your job? Isn't it your job to find the votes and to go to those other parties and see what you can do to get their support? Isn't that what your
those conversations are happening. The Finance Minister has had other conversations. I talked about the Prime Minister. Other ministers are speaking with members of all of the opposition parties. We're getting their input. But we believe we have a mandate, and at the end of the day, some hard choices are going to have to be made. The Prime Minister talks about spending less on operating expenditures in the federal government so that we can invest in things that we must invest in, which is...
So let's break that down for a second. We've got Sandra Copina with a video that breaks exactly that operating and capital expenditure down that Mark Carney's doing, his dirty banker accounting trick.
Is irresponsible. So my question to you is, why are you changing how you present the budget rather than changing your reckless spending so that on a net basis, you actually balance it?
Well, you should ask yourself why you voted against measures that support Canadians. I think people watching at home would be surprised to see your voting records and say you voted against measures that would make your life more easy.
Very simple answer. I really want you to answer my question. Why are you changing how you're presenting it rather than actually trying to balance the budget?
I think Canadians are entitled to transparency. In a frank discussion between you and I think your husband and your family and everyone in your riding is entitled to have more transparency to see the budgeting where their tax.
Yeah, this guy's a word salad. He doesn't answer the question. He and everyone else should be fined for not answering questions. $5,000, boom. So she's got another video here breaking down exactly what these swindly weasels are doing.
You've probably heard that Prime Minister Mark Carney says he's going to balance the operating budget. But did you know that he's being sneaky because he's moving things around that would typically be on the operating budget into the capital budget? So here's really what's happening. For the first time in Canada's history, this government is splitting our national books into two budgets, the operating budget and the capital budget. So in a household budget, operating costs would typically include groceries, gas, and utilities. And the capital would typically cover things that build value, like your home and the mortgage that goes along with that. That typically makes sense, right? But here's where it doesn't. Carney's now moving everyday expenses, things like tax breaks, corporate subsidies, into the investment column. That's like calling your grocery bill a down payment on a house. So let's review together the government's own website. Capital focus corporate income tax incentives. So if the government gives a tax break, meaning less revenue, it will imaginarily move it into capital investment. But less revenue is less money, not an investment. Let's look at another one. Significant operating subsidies. So when the government gives away your tax dollars to big corporations, they're calling it a capital investment. But there's no capital asset. There's no public asset, just corporate welfare dressed up as an asset. This is budget manipulation, plain and simple. And if you want to stop it, join me. I have a petition to restore the honesty to Canada's books and protect your tax dollars.
So they could be giving money over to McKinsey and then they're treating it like an asset so it's not a net negative on the books. These are dirty accounting tricks once again. Not surprised coming from Mark Carney, the guy who helped Brookfield dodge $5.3 billion in taxes.
Growth producing major projects, assets across the country. That's the plan, I think, that we've been very transparent and very consistent on describing since the election. And the election was 6 months ago. So it'll be in the opposition party's hands to determine whether after 6 months of very consistent talk from this government about the challenges we face and how we propose to address them, it's on them if they wish to make this.
Well, I mean, frankly, that sounds a little bit like a dare. I mean, it might be on them to make a decision on how they're going to vote, but it is on a minority government to decide if it wants to survive and to come up with a way to either get people not to show up and vote or get their support. I get what you're trying to do here, but the ball is also in your court.
Well, what I'm trying to do here is explain to Canadians that we've spoken to the opposition. Yeah. We've made very plain that these are the parameters in which we're willing to have discussions. We are going to have to rationalize some of the operating expenditures of the government. We are going to have to invest in our economic capacity as a country. Those will be major investments. So within that, what specific contributions, large and small, might you offer to the government's agenda? We've asked those questions, I think, pretty explicitly of the opposition. They will have to decide, because we are not negotiating on those principles. We'll negotiate on details, but we're not negotiating on principles. The principles of
net zero. That's what the principles are.
Invest less. Spend less to invest more.
Invest less. Don't worry, you got it the first time. This is essentially a dare. They're daring the other parties to go to an election thinking that they have the upper edge right now in the polls. You'll notice there, he mentioned that we have to spend a ton of money on major infrastructure projects. These are the ones they laid out. They're going to be adding whatever 5 or so more. These projects are ones that Mark Carney financially has something to do with almost all of these. This is ridiculous. Not only that, a lot of these projects, like this new nuclear facility, are already in construction. It's partly constructed. Carney just wants to stick his name on it. All Carney's doing is helping get these projects over the line so his stocks in these companies go up in value. He's not trying to help us. He's trying to enrich his own stocks and then Red Chris mine. This is preposterous.
Those are principles we won't negotiate on. So the opposition parties will have to determine whether the differences between us are sufficiently large to cause the Canadians to go to the polls.
Yeah.
After 6 months.
Okay, but would you be comfortable going to the polls?
With a government that has a mandate,
yes,
we believe, to put this plan into action.
But would you be comfortable going to the polls based on that?
We would be reluctant to go to the polls. We don't believe an election's necessary. We, in fact, think Canadians would rather the government get on with things, and that's what we're proposing to do. The opposition, once again, will have to decide after 6 months whether those differences are sufficiently large that they're going to have to explain to Canadians why they're causing an election at Christmas time.
Sure. I mean,
see, this is what they're doing. They're trying to make the Conservatives look bad. That's why there's this whole idea of the blue flu and just having this go through and wait until the numbers are for sure again, and then have an election, take these guys down and throw their butts out of power. They're playing chicken here because they think they're going to win right now.
You would also have to explain why you didn't put forward a budget that could get passed. I take your point, but everyone would have to bear some responsibility. You mentioned Pierre Poilievre and Yves-François Blanchet. You didn't mention the NDP, Don Davies, with a much reduced caucus. Are there any talks going on from you and your office about getting their support or potentially helping them with some of their parliamentary budget to try and get their support?
Well, I've spoken to Mr. Davies many times, as have many of my colleagues. I didn't lump them in with the other two parties because, frankly, their public commentary, their public commentary has been a little bit more constructive than the others, not ruling anything in, not ruling anything out. I have no idea what the NDP intends to do with respect to its votes on the budget. That'll obviously be up to their caucus and to their party. But again, the math is pretty clear. We don't have a majority, and if we don't have the votes, an election will occur around Christmas time in Canada.
Okay.
He's playing chicken here. Essentially, he's almost threatening it. This is going to cost a lot of money. It's their fault. It's not ours. Now, jumping over to the situation in BC, we got polling data. We got the whole meltdown with John Rustad. We got some polling data. This is BC provincial polling. This is shocking that the Conservatives are still leading despite how disastrous John Rustad is burning the party into the ground. And you'll notice the One BC party is now on the map here with 5%. So not only are the Conservatives dropping, but so are the NDP. This is going over to the Green Party, who has a new 20-some-odd-year-old leader. We also have approval ratings or lack thereof for all the leaders, and all of them are tanking. They're all negative, with John Rustad at minus 40%. He needs to step down. I could go through all the bad things going on in British Columbia right now, but we've got Caroline Elliott here. She often highlights a lot of the land right issue problems in British Columbia, whether it's First Nations shutting down Joffrey Lakes, the Cowichan stealing land in Richmond, and she knocks this out of the park.
Once the party president signed for me, I was like, wow. Like things, they want change. They're looking for change.
Yeah, and I think just generally, as a British Columbian, I guess, watching this all play out, I'm frustrated because we have unprecedented deficits being piled onto insurmountable debt for our kids to pay off. We have a healthcare system that's not really working for anybody. We have a public safety disaster. We have, a decriminalization experiment that the Premier has even admitted isn't really working. We've got, investors fleeing the province with the capital that they would invest to create jobs in this province. And then on top of all
more
that,
effective opposition right here in 2 minutes than we've seen from the people sitting in the House.
Well, and this is the reality, right? We're in a really difficult situation in BC with all kinds of challenges, not to mention the Cowichan ruling, which came down and has thrown property rights into a lot of question, and there's some chaos around that. So these are the things that I think the public wants to focus on. These are the things I want to focus on and we want to focus on. But instead, we're talking about party turmoil. And so I think what really happens is when you look around and you realize the stories about our internal turmoil are taking away from our ability to hold this government to account for the absolute mess they've made of this province, then you need to think about doing the right thing for British Columbia, right? And that's making a change. It's making some room for a renewal and getting the party into shape.
But he's not really wanting, he keeps saying.
Yeah, so she's basically saying John Rustad needs to step down, and he does, because we need to defeat David Eby. He's a disaster, and John Rustad is a sinking anchor here. He's like a grumpy little toddler, just like David Eby. When you throw out multiple people out of your party and then you have multiple people calling you out to step down, maybe it's not everyone else's fault. Complete blowout 7 more MLAs signing a letter for him to resign. There's already been numerous that have resigned or he's kicked out of the party. And what does he come back with? I'm not resigning. David Eby and the NDP are gearing up for an election because they know that this crap storm here will give them a strong majority government. And there's no strong opposition with Rustad being such a bad leader. He didn't fight at all in the previous election. He let David Eby walk all over him. And the way he's running the party is awful. It's time to resign, Rustad. You're doing a bad job. If he resigns right away and a new leader gets in place and start mending the party together, we can actually get a conservative government in BC. I guess it all comes down to how greedy is John Rustad.